And then this item here is going to have to be bolted in. That's one of the next things we're going to do. This defroster handler, how it clips on is there are two little clips right down there. They're pretty hard to see, but they're basically, they just jam in there. They spread out. When you're popping this back off, if you carefully pry this off, it'll just pop right out. Hopefully it won't bust anything. There's one on here and there's one on the other side. The unit just sits there a little bit loose. It'll get a little bit tighter as other pieces go back on there. But that is the piece that you actually need to sort of get in there. And when you're getting it off, it just sort of pries out. I don't know if there's really any way to get a tool in there to actually pry that back out, but it's just sort of a spring load thing that sort of pops open like this as it goes in. When you pull it out, it comes back out. So also when you're bolting in the cross beam, cross member there, the roll bar thingy, you'll actually have to put in a couple of these. You'll see these are covering the actual bolts that you see inside the door panel. They just pry off. So just take a screwdriver and gently pry them off and they'll pop right off. And then once you're done, you can put them back on again. We've torqued these things down, as well as the two bolts that had to go on, one on this side and one in the back there. And we're now ready to move on to some other pieces. Okay, also way in the back up there you can see there's one additional bolt that has to be put in as well. Okay, so we've sort of got the front support frame bar in place. It's roughly in place. As you can see, I still got a screwdriver holding it in there. I'm not going to fully mount it in just yet because we got some other components to start putting back together again, but we can start to sort of get some of the pieces back in. You can see I've re-pushed the actual harness back in place, and I've reattached one of the ground wires, put some loose zip ties to replace the existing zip ties that were on there. They were cracking, they were old, they were sort of decaying. I'm going to put a couple of zip ties on there because they're pretty heavy duty, the ones I took out of there. And then we'll continue on putting components in. Before I get anything gone too far, I'm going to start putting some of the air components back on in the back here. Okay, this is going to be one of the harder things you're going to have to do, is to get this roll bar support frame thingy back in. You're going to need a couple of people, one to lift from this end while you put in the driver's side first. And the driver's side has a couple of large bolts that go through it. You can see there's one there and one down in here that go into the, on this side, go into the bar on this side, the support. And then down here there's some more sort of bolts to put on. This one here that comes from the other side. So it's easiest if you have a second person helping you lifting on the one side. I had to get somebody to help me here to be able to lift this one side so that this side could go in first, because you sort of have to lift it and sort of slide it in, and then you can bolt it on. Okay, the next piece we're putting in is this fuse box. We had taken it out before. It goes in with one screw on this particular clamp, and then there's also a couple of plug-in components that we had taken out. They just go plugging back in when you slide this thing to the side, which I'm not going to do right now because it's been a little difficult, but you slide this piece over here and then the thing pops out. There's another one in behind, a smaller one. Those pieces are in. We also reattach this plug back in here, which holds the wiring in place. Okay, so this is a fuse box that we had to disconnect to get a little more leeway on the actual wiring. You can see that I have put back in the two pieces I took out, which were these connector components. These clips sort of slide off this way, and then once you put them back in, you just put them back in and slide those clips back in, and they'll push that connector piece back in. And then this thing just goes back up over top of here and gets bolted in right in there like that. So we'll right in there like that. So that's the piece we're going to put in next. One of the pieces that I had to disconnect as sort of one of the last steps was this electrical component box back here. It just has a screw sticking out of the firewall there, And I had to take this out in order to loosen this cross member, this cross bar here, so that it was capable of being wide enough to get the air handling box out. And it's just a simple little 10 mil that's going to go on that screw to hold it in place. So here you can see we got the box back in. And this is by far one of the hardest things you're going to have to do on this whole thing, because this bar is going to fight with you unless you disconnect absolutely everything. Also, you got to get lined up with the two holes in the back. You got to get these big grommets in place at the right point and get all the other things lined up. It's going to be a bit of a task. Just stick with it, take your time, go slow. It does eventually go in. It sits on two large pins at the back. They're plastic pins. They stick out of the firewall and are mounted into the firewall. They don't amount to anything, but they do go into two sort of holder slots at the back of the HVAC box here, the air handling box, and they sit right on there. You should feel it sort of clip in and slide in nicely when it's done, and it should just sit there nice and firm. Part of the problem you're going to face is down on the inside here. As you can see, you got to come through sort of one firewall and then through this other sort of frame component that you could take off. I didn't bother to, but you can see there those two rather large grommets right down here. They're large rubber grommets that the pipes have to go through, and then these grommets have to go into this sort of framing component here, this sort of light frame piece. And the same on the other side. And it's the same on the other side over here. You're going to have to get that grommet in and the pipe through the grommet without having it all disconnected. So make sure those grommets are in place before you start connecting back up the hoses down there for the heating. So as you can see, we've now got the heater core in. We've added this component back on. We'll add these two things back in. And most importantly, there's this little white clip that has to go back into the bottom here that holds the core in place. So here is the installed AC condenser, and you can see it on the inside there. And there is the valves that you have to make sure you're aware of where they belong when you put them back in on the actuators, which is down on the bottom there. But one thing you are going to have to install before you do anything else is you're going to have to put in this temperature sensor, and it goes on the inside, towards the inside of the car, and it just sort of jams right into those fins. Make sure you don't do any damage when you're doing it. Just try to slip it between the fins and slide it in, and it'll just sit there and track the temperature of that air conditioning unit. Okay, so there you can see the condenser is reinstalled back in the blower box. It's a bit of a tight fit. Just make sure you don't damage the foam when you're sliding it in. That's why you wrap it around on the back side a little bit, and everything else is set to go. So really what we're doing is we're starting at this point, starting to put some of the HVAC components back together and some of the structural pieces. That's that little metal piece right there, you'll see in some of the videos, goes for the top of the actual steering wheel. And then we'll put the actual dash back in, some additional HVAC components, steering wheel, an instrument gauge cluster, and the clock back in the dash. And then what we'll do is we'll go back and start putting in some of the electrical components around the steering wheel. Those HVAC components can go in at any point in time. The vent covers, radio, upper dash, stick control. This will go in first, followed by the top of the console. We'll put back the blower, and then a whole bunch of additional panels and components that can go in after the fact, after everything's sort of back together. And this is, again, roughly the order that these things will go back together, and then we'll finish up in the engine bay. The very first thing we're going to do, of course, is we're going to build a grating for this that for some reason wasn't in this car. So we're going to build a customized grate that you can, I'll show you how to do. You can get it from the Home Depot store. Some netting to make sure that the mice don't come back into the car again. I'm not sure if there was something supposed to cover this originally, or if there was a piece taken out. The car has never been, seriously serviced or overhauled by anybody other than the dealership. So if there was something there, It vanished, but we're going to build a new screening to keep out the mice, and then we won't have this issue again.